Okay, so my name is Anya Arnold. I'm the Global Director of FOLIO EBSCO Consulting Services. It is a mouthful. I also put the N in there because there's too many A's. So, but I never introduced myself as that. So, I've been working with FOLIO since 2017 when it began, and it was an idea. So I've seen it grow and explode, and I'm super excited to talk to you about simplicity. But first, you have to get through our introductions. So, Robert
Heaton. I'm originally from Elgin, just down the road here in Illinois, but I've been in Utah for years. Work at EBSCO on Anya's team doing FOLIO implementations.
Me? All right, I'm Jennifer Pearson. I do the same thing that Robert does. I am the token Southerner on the implementation team.
Yes, and so Robert has a lot of experience in academic libraries, and Jennifer has a lot of experience in public libraries and administration. And then I have a lot of experience in both implementing from a vendor perspective as well as from a library perspective. So we've seen a lot of it. So why do you all, so this is a audience participation meeting because it's after lunch and you're tired. Why do you all think simplicity is hard? Shout it out. There's no wrong answer.
It requires research, thought, planning, and effort.
Yes. Yes, Aaron.
We don't like change.
We don't like change. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? All right. So it does require research, thought, planning, and effort. And it also requires time. So you actually really have to put a lot of thought and effort into being simple. Whose desk is a mess? Everyone should raise their hand. No, Allie, no, my desk is a mess. But I'm sure you have something in which it is a mess. And we use that mess as an excuse to not simplify. Oh, I definitely, who has that kitchen cabinet drawer?
Oh, the junk drawer?
The everything drawer, or, how often do we organize it? Do we know what's in there? When we're pissed off, right? When I organized mine when I had COVID. This was the only thing I could do. But so all that clutter kind of gets in the way of being able to do something. Sometimes I have to find, a certain thing to allow myself to actually think about how am I going to make this process better. So here's a great quote. I'll let you guys read it from Steve Jobs. He's that guy that wears the turtlenecks. Ted. So simplicity comes from simple, but it doesn't mean that it's simple. All right. And it takes small steps to be able to move mountains. You can't do grand gestures here. I'm not a big fan of grand gestures. It's the everyday moments that get you through. In the end, simplicity is really important because it sets us free. Okay. There's a lot of learned helplessness. If I was to go through this maze, it's going to take me a long time and I might just never do it. But if I go around it, if I think my way around it or see myself around corners, it's a lot easier to do that. So some of the complexity is psychological complexity in that we say we can't do these things. We have a hard time. We throw up reasons because we don't want to change. But simplicity is powerful. The more we can show that we can make it simple or more streamlined, the more people think we know what we're doing. The more we show how complex it is, the more people think that we don't know what we're doing. So here's Pascal's quote. It's often misquoted, but it's awesome. That, he really means if I had time, I wouldn't have written so much. How much time does it take us to write a pithy tweet or a good tweet?
A little bit.
It takes us some time. I'm a horrible speller, right? My grammar is horrible most times. So if I'm just being really quick, you can tell it's not as nice. It's not as grammatically correct. But if I take the time, it can be short, it can be clear, and it can be simple. Okay. Time to engage.
I have a question first.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to engage in a second. I have a question to gauge who's in this audience. So there are two questions, and the answer can be yes to both. Who in this audience makes decisions, big decisions about, hey, we're going to move from something to FOLIO? Who in this room are those people who make those decisions? No one in this room makes those decisions. You
Or
as part of a team.
are you a decision?
Are you a decision maker or a practitioner? You can raise your hand. Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, who are the folks in these? Maybe yes to both. Who actually implement something new? Who are in the trenches and they're doing the work? Okay. All right. I just wanted to know. So we're engaging now. So here is what we're going to do. We're going to try to simplify something. So what we have are a couple of slides that have opening sentences from novels, one sentence. What we want to try to do, and it's probably good if you guys get together in a group, ostensibly great. It would be great if someone had a piece of paper because we didn't print these out because we don't want to kill trees. Okay, so what you're going to try to do with this one sentence is to distill it down into something that is A, more than one sentence, B, has all the same content in it, and C is much shorter, more like a newspaper than a novel. Okay, ready? Clear? All right. Pressure? Feel pressure? All right. Heartbeat, heart rate. All right. So here's the first one by my favorite author because I'm from Mississippi. My favorite book ever. Can you see it all? Can you live that, Robert? At all? Oh, yeah, there we go. So take this one sentence and turn it into a much simpler explanation of everything that's happening there. There are no right answers.
We're just gonna stare at you while you do it.
It was hot.
Let's start there. It was hot.
That's a really big part of this, right? It was hot before the 3 summers because when she was a girl. That's how he would have said it.
In a few moments.
We're not going to make you read your answers aloud if you don't want to. So,
But if you'd like to volunteer.
yes, sir. It is a run. Who's read Faulkner? What does Faulkner do? Beautiful run-on sentences.
You simplify it, you lose the beauty of it.
Exactly. But you're simplifying it
So that it's
not
approachable.
possible. So that anybody reading like a newspaper can say, I understand this. I didn't have to read it 6 times to understand it. Right? Yeah. They're all of these, and we're only going to do 2, are the first sentence of a novel. So it's a 122 word sentence.
Who feels uncomfortable? Yeah. Who else? Okay, Kevin. Anyone else feel uncomfortable right now? Like being asked to do this? Oh, you're
Not
amazing.
with doing this, but with
Oh,
this.
the sentence.
This,
Oh,
yes.
okay.
Like analyze.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Like, what is it? No, say more. I don't know what you mean.
I'm just having you read it over and over again.
Right.
Because it's
What's happening?
one sentence.
Yeah.
It's not very simple. And is it hard to think about how to simplify it?
Mhm.
Do you think we'd understand it more if you did? Yes, the answer is yes. Yes, you would. Yes, you would.
Yeah.
That's the whole premise of this entire presentation.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. Okay. Anybody want to simplify it? Anybody want to say it out loud? There's no right answer. It was a hot September day in the afternoon. Period. Well, there's more. Yeah.
In a dusty office.
Yeah. Miss Coalfield was in her father's office with the blinds closed because it was summer.
That's good. So it's like 4 sentences now.
I think 3.
Right.
Okay.
Fine.
And then there's another thing about why that's important. And then Quentin's there, period. Quentin, the friend of Shreep. Right? Cat's name, Quentin and Shreep. All right. Okay. So do you guys understand what the theory of what we're doing? Right? Okay. We'll look at one more. We won't make you do one more, but it's just the idea that, you know, you can write this beautiful soliloquy of a run-on sentence, because that's beautiful in literature, right? Are we doing literature? I mean, I'd love to write a book, but that's not my job. So here's Emma, 180 words. This one might be easier, but it's longer. Got a rich guy. Got a rich girl. It's nice to marry a rich woman. Yeah. Pretty much it.
Period.
It's nice work if you can get it. All right. So that's the engagement. That's the engagement. We have another one, but we won't.
Where our clicker is not working, but it's fun.
That's the last one. Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh. Very great danger during the terrible flood. Owl and Plinklet. My kids used to say.
Now these are great stories, right? These are like classic literature. But are they very approachable?
Who remembers reading that to their kids, right? And the mouth, you love this, but then you think you love it from childhood, and then you start reading it to your kid, and you're like, oh no. But it's beautiful, but it's not very approachable. All right. So when you want to start a new project, we all have projects we want to do all the time, right? The first question you need to ask yourself about any big project is to what end? Okay. I used to work for somebody at some place in my past who I liked and didn't like at the same time. The most important thing this person taught me at this place I used to work was to what end? If you can't answer that question, don't do it. If you don't have a vision for what you're doing, that is simple, right? The techniques are all difficult under it. If you can't tell me your vision and you can't tell other folks your vision, why are you doing it? You know, why are you buying a new car? Why are you buying a new house? Why are you switching your library management system? Because that's hard, right? I was the director of a small public library for 8.5 years. Now, it was a small public library, so this wasn't nearly as important or nearly as complicated. But I thought about it sometimes, right? Because you want to do new things and interesting things. And every time I said, this is more difficult, it won't give me as much return, I'm going to put my effort somewhere else. I'm not encouraging people in this room to do that. But you always have to ask yourself, to what end? Why am I doing this? What's my elevator speech, right? Because I think Anya says this all the time. If you don't have a clear vision, then you can't implement something, right? If everybody doesn't understand why you're doing it at the simplest level, don't do it. And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? Right, this does or doesn't work. It does.
Now.
It does. And this sort of segues into when less leads to more. Okay. So you've got this vision, right? And hopefully part of the reason you're doing this is so you can simplify things so people can do other things. Okay. So you're doing less somewhere so you can do more somewhere else. Right. So you want to do this. You want to streamline things. You want to make things better. And that's hard at first.
Yes.
Yep. It's going to take a long time, but eventually you're doing this to what end? Because you want to do something else, right? That's when less is more. Now, I'm not saying do more with less because none of us want to hear that. We've all heard it before. This is not do more with less. This is do something different because you're doing less in an area that you should do less in, that should need less work. Or as Coco Chanel says, take something off before you leave the house. Look at your accessories. I didn't wear a necklace today, so I have earrings. But that's the theory of this, right? Less is good. Sometimes less is more. Think about less. Sometimes less is hard, right? Because you want to put on all the makeup and jewels and dripping, and you look at yourself and think, maybe less is more here. Right.
Right. Now Robert's going to bring us home for us.
No.
Just check in on chat since we have something there. So
No, good. I love this. Okay. The audience is not mic'd. All right. So look, we'll sum it up from what the audience said. We had them play games and they answered some good they answered with some good answers. They answered with some good answers. But if we have more serious questions, we'll be sure to repeat them, which we probably will after you talk.
So this is getting a little bit more concrete, but not down to the level of all the details of all the complexity that we would handle in FOLIO. But just a couple of examples to sort of practice this muscle of what might we look at. So the first example is order records. Notoriously complex, not just in FOLIO, but the idea is that they support complex workflows. Different institutions have different needs. In FOLIO in particular, there's kind of this dance between the POs and the PO lines. There's relationships with organization records, inventory records, invoice records. There are a lot of fields, but not just the quantity. There's kind of a lot of judgment calls and expertise needed on individual items. So locally, we might kind of re-raise that question of what did we decide about when we're going to click that box about independent order and receipt quantities. When we do an evidence-based acquisitions package, are we checking the collections box, or does that mean something else for us? Kind of all these training and documentation issues that training and documentation would be one approach to solving some of those workflow kind of questions. And the way that I think of it is that we can't really remove the complexity, but we can move it. That's kind of the theme throughout what I'm going to show you. Rather than facing those judgment calls as a training issue, and every time someone gets to this screen, they have to go through those questions again, we can move the complexity into creating order templates. You could bring together your whole committee of people involved with that to make sure that we agree on like what goes where and those kinds of things. But then you can really trust your frontline staff that's doing the clicking just to select the right template from the list, right? There's also the possibility in the templates to put some of the instructions, right? We might find a field where we can say, if it's one of these, do this. If it's one of these, do this, especially to deal with the complexity of an overly long list of templates if it kind of gets to that level of complexity. I've kind of enjoyed hearing different libraries and how they've gotten creative about using order templates. I don't know who exactly is among our acquisitions practitioners here, but does anybody have some examples of that, of where you've taken the options that you can handle in FOLIO and done something to meet a need in particular? Have any acquisitions folks with ideas along those lines?
Yeah, and are you using templates?
I'm not an acquisition person, but I know we create a template for Amazon pages. those that are handy for more than stuff.
So Yen said in the audience that Notre Dame Law created templates for Amazon purchases. Sorry, Amazon purchases. I couldn't hear you. Amazon purchases, and it's been really helpful for her staff there to just be able to click on that template that's filled out. Yeah.
And I've been pretty impressed with the features around this that, you know, for those of you where this isn't where you live, it's got the little eye icons. So you can decide to hide a field so that when people open that template, they don't have to look at it. And that could be because it's not relevant, it doesn't need to be used, or it can be because you do want to populate it and not have people mess with it. So I think that's a great kind of option to do quite a bit for your different kinds of things. You might have different donors that you handle things differently. I know that there's a lot of requirements around donations in a lot of cases, so you might have unique notes or locations that are populated into the order record that way. So again, the idea here is kind of front loading the complexity to make the ongoing operations simpler. As a second example of complexity in Folio is circulation rules. The example here, I'm gonna assume we're not all practitioners that could read to me what exactly is going here. So I'll give the quick kind of a summary there. The numbered rows are the circulation rules that Folio applies given the parameters of the transaction. So in this case, the criteria on the left side of each rule is the material type. So either compact disc, DVD, VHS, and that's the only criterion, kind of a simplified one that way. On the right side of each of those rules in the purple are the 5 different policy types that each rule has to apply. So the loan policy, request policy, notice policy, etc. So the Folio has some great granularity around kind of reusing things and repurposing. So what you can see, if you look at the 5 policies to the right of each of these, with the exception of the first one, the loan policy, the other 4 are identical across these 3. So these are kind of the same rule with a little bit of an adjustment. So kind of in this imaginary example, the loan rule is actually almost identical as well that kind of underlies each of those. So you've got maybe a 7-day checkout for each of those, maybe one renewal, right? Those sorts of details that are built into the loan policy. And so normally what we would recommend is to say, if it matches any of these material types, compact disc, DVD, or VHS, then apply all these same policies. And you just have one loan policy that's media or AV or whatever it is, right? But what I've done here is spell out a separate loan policy. And rather than like ask you, well, what do you think I'm getting at here? One of the tricks is that the loan policy incorporates or can incorporate an item limit. So if your idea is that patrons come in and you want them only to check out 5 of any of these, 5 CDs, 5 DVDs, 5 VHS. In general, a library would want 5 of any of those, right? Like you can get 5 of each. The way that Folio works is that that same loan policy, it tallies it no matter how many rules are used to apply that same policy. So if we just had a media policy with a 5-item limit, if I checked out 5 CDs, I could get no DVDs. If I got 4 DVDs, I could only get 1 VHS. And that's not what really any library wants. So the point here is we've made more complexity in this list of rules and the list of policies, like both of those are magnified. And this is a short example. If you think of your own locations and patron groups and material types and everything else, there's going to be more, exponentially more complexity. But what I would recommend for any library would be to do something like this, to build that complexity into the implementation process to simplify when you're troubleshooting later and patrons say, how come their policy is lying to me? Why is this not working? Your staff coming saying, well, you said this is how it works, and trying to go in circles to figure out where is this problem happening. If anybody's implemented item limits and automated patron blocks, then that can be part of that too, of like a total item checkout. So to troubleshoot all that really gets pretty messy.
So I have a question. So what you're saying is you front load the complexity in order to save the complexity of the troubleshooting later. So you do all up front, so that ongoing, it's easier. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to keep this example up, but talk through some other kind of circulation things. The criteria, again, on the left side, the different criteria, there's a lot of flexibility. There's different orders that you can nest in your exceptions and things like that. So you might have locations and then material types and then patron groups, or you could do the reverse of that. There's also loan types that, depending on what ILS libraries are coming from, that's kind of a new label that's placed on item records for the purpose of defining different criteria for circulation rules. And so some libraries use something like loan type really extensively. They'll have a big taxonomy of things that aren't defined by circulation or material type or these other characteristics, so that they can get really granular in how they apply things. Other libraries might just have a single like default value or circulating and non-circulating that they more rarely would apply. And I guess the point is that we guide libraries toward the simplest option that meets their goals. To what end, right? Because sometimes they do have things that they're trying to accomplish that can't be done in other ways. But generally, we try not to just say, oh, that's how you've done it before. Let's just continue that. Let's take, frankly, that is trying to simplify one aspect of how they conceptualize it by complicating another aspect. Patron notices is just kind of a brief example. Do faculty really merit a different template than students?
Whoa,
Or
you went there.
or do the tokens that would populate it with the checkout period and due dates, like that just does the job of differentiating between them? I think that's an area where we would recommend simplifying where possible, but again, libraries have reasons to make it more complex for other purposes. And one last thing related to circulation that I think is really kind of neat in Folio is the location hierarchy. Again, those kind of semi-familiar. It has 4 levels: institution, campus, library, and location. Any of those can be used as criteria in the circulation rules. So that already opens up some possibilities. But I think the more important point is that they are not rigidly defined. So if you've got a public library system with branches, you can call those campuses, or you can call those libraries, or however you want to organize. But I think that's an area where some flexible kind of lateral thinking can simplify what happens here, rather than defining out here's all of these lists of locations or things like that. So what you might do, right, if you only have one campus, you could spell out as kind of collections and call them campuses, right? You might have special collections and archives. You might have course reserves. You might have a K-12 curriculum collection and general stacks. Each of those could have policies applied at the general level, like special collections might not allow holds or something. Course reserves might not allow renewals. You can think of these things that would happen at that general level. And then by location or patron group or material type of those other things, you can really simplify what happens here by not having to spell out those criteria. You just say location and then a couple exceptions. Okay. Then to give one last example of kind of a different kind, the process of migrating to Folio generally involves a team on the library end, but there's a wide variety of approaches to how that team's formed. I'll just sort of propose this continuum of a smaller team to a bigger team. And if we think about like the one-man show, this is pretty realistic at some settings where you may only have 4 or 5 librarians and you've got one person who can take time out of their dozen kind of jobs to do that. That would then maybe work with a vendor like EBSCO. So again, a little bit of interaction here. What are some of the advantages of having a single person lead the implementation on behalf of the library? What are the things that work better because of that setup?
Communication.
So the answer from the audience was it could require less communication. Any other benefits that you would think?
Accountability and decision making.
Explain.
So if there's just one person who's leading it, then there's no ambiguity about who is empowered to make decisions or who is accountable for getting stuff done. There's just one person.
So the answer for the audience is accountability and responsibility, right? So that there's only one person that's responsible for making the decisions and moving forward.
It's kind of awkward if there's one person and I'm like, okay, who is going to take on this assignment?
Yes.
Oh, can I put you down?
Like when we say we are gonna do something, yeah, no, we never did anything,
right.
right?
Yes.
We're gonna leave and do something. No, you're not.
So there are some advantages, I think, kind of related to both of those, like decision making and the process is more streamlined and faster, right? We could get through an implementation because it's just up to you to tell us what you think. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Also, the designated 1% is helpful for the folio consultant. Sometimes they could get a mixed message from, yeah.
Well, yeah, there could be mixed messages from the library to the folio implementation consultant or whoever's implementing folio if there's more than one leader or group in the team. Yep.
Great. So what about the reverse? Let's get and focus on the one person team there. What are the challenges? What is it that becomes more complex and just doesn't work as well?
If you have one person.
Yeah.
What are the challenges for one person? Sarah?
Time management.
Time. The answer is time.
Also expertise.
Expertise. Anybody else?
So I think we're starting to lean this way too, but
Yeah.
imagine that it's one person representing a bigger library now, right? Like you've got somebody that's making decisions for a really broad group. That does get challenging. They're not likely to have that expertise of other people that could have been in the room. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say, so I work at EBSCO, the implementation team, and I was gonna say from the implementations I've seen, there's a lot of decisions to be made from both like organizational workflow to very technical kind of in the weeds decisions. And so jumping off of what you said, that would be complicated for one person to be able to make all of those decisions. It's easier to delegate to other people.
So the level of decisions that are presented to one person could be outside of their wheelhouse, and you might get decision fatigue. I'm
Yes.
putting words in your mouth there.
Well, that's right.
Okay. Lucy.
So earlier you mentioned communication as being something that go easier, but the flip side of that is if you're not communicating, you're not getting buy-in from everybody. So that would be one downside to only having one person is everybody else is like, well, I don't like that.
Right. So buy-in, just to repeat for the audience, is getting people to like understand how you're making the decisions and why you're making those decisions could be an issue if you're just singly making the decisions.
Totally.
So in interest of time, we won't kind of go through the reverse, but of a bigger team and what does that look like? But I think you can imagine it's basically the opposite constraints, that more people with more expertise have the value of bringing that to the meeting, but it's harder to schedule a meeting. It's harder to come to a decision. But there's better buy-in. There's people who have been involved in the process and can move forward with it as you go forward. So really there's no perfect structure, right? You're not hoping to hear like, here's, this proportion of your team should be involved. Some of it is just going to be hard, and it's a matter of choosing where you want that difficulty and that complexity to be. Do you need to get it done in 3 months and you just got to get one person that makes the decisions and then deal with the aftermath later? Like that's a reasonable approach depending on the constraints you have.
It's not reasonable.
But you do want to know that and consider that up front and know what you're getting into. So the last thing that I wanted to show is this drawing of a root structure. Kind of cool. Metropolitan Museum of Art has a bunch of these drawings online now. Massive, tangled, complex root system that produces this tiny, tidy, attractive plant at the top. And it's really a matter of who you want to make things beautiful for, right? That implementation process is going to be messy. And so it's a matter of how much you want to account for, first of all, frontline staff, right? People doing the ongoing workflows. What should they need to grapple with as they approach their settings, workflows and things like that? And then ultimately the users, what which decisions have the most impact on them? How do you determine your material types and your loan policies and everything else? So that what they see is, oh, this is a great library. This works the way that I expect it to.
So thank you for your awkward participation. I really appreciate that. But really it kind of comes down to like, choose your heart, like where do you want it to be hard? Do you want it to be hard for your implementation staff, or do you want it to be hard for your frontline staff that need to be trained on how to use it? Or do you want it to be hard for your patrons and your faculty and your sponsors that are coming to your library and are using your library? Personally, I would choose the implementation team. But that's, I want all of you to feel like your jobs on day one, and not to feel, nobody likes to feel incompetent, right? Raise your hand if you do. Yeah. So, you want to be able to know what you need to know in order to perform your job. So thinking about it in that way allows you to kind of see, where can I simplify this for my staff, for my patrons, and even for your implementation team, right? So when you're moving houses, do you bring the trash? Not usually, right? I mean, I've had a mover come in and just, pack everything. But, or do you really kind of evaluate, should I bring this piece of furniture that I've had since my dorm room college days that has seen better days? No. Okay. But also, you also want to bring along the policies, or maybe some cultural aspects. Maybe you can leave aside the this is how we did it because that's the way the system demanded us to do it, right? Because FOLIO is a consent first system. Most other ILSs are, I'm going to tell you how to do it, right? FOLIO flips that on its head. So you have to tell FOLIO how to behave. So really think about how you want FOLIO to behave going forward, and then you can readjust it if you don't like it, right? So who has the first question?
I have like a weird question, which I don't want to. I am kind of asking like disaster stories. But
Yeah, I can tell you disaster stories. Yeah, sure.
So I think that even when we have cases where people accept the fact that it's going to be different and it has to be different, they often want to like discuss, why are we where we are today? Why did we do it the way we did it? Just so we don't miss it.
Right.
Just so we make sure we did it. We did in fact do it that way because the system made us, not because there was some really obscure good reason to do it. And that takes a lot of time, and more time than we have. So you said something, Robert, you said something about like one person makes decisions, and then like you deal with the fallout, like how to get people comfortable with it. One, the fallout probably won't be different. It's just libraries.
No one's gonna
And
die.
two, like honestly, what's the worst that can happen? To get people past, we need to learn how we need to configure FOLIO. We don't need to remember how we configure Voyager. Just throwing that to everyone for advice.
So
Okay, go ahead.
Well, can we summarize first?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
So-
Yeah.
So the question from the audience was, like, not to give us disaster stories, but to say what things we've learned from, rehashing how you implemented your current system as you move towards your new system versus kind of making a decision and dealing with the fallout that might not be as big as imagined. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, and you just good job simplifying.
You just proved the point.
Just enters my head. So I'm looking at you, Andrew, because we had Okanagan. Okanagan needed to be live in 4 months. Their system was going away, right? We did it. They had a very small team making all the decisions. And they went, the key person went out on maternity 2 months in.
Goodness.
So
Oh my.
it was fun, right? We were all worried that she was going to give birth during a meeting. So, but they went live and they were able to train, we were able to train them. However, 4 months is not enough time, right? There was a lot of people on their staff that were angry, very angry at their local implementation team. They had to have a lot of meetings afterwards, therapy sessions on, okay, this is why we made these decisions. This is how we did it. And they're still very happy with FOLIO. They were just mad about not being included. Okay. So it wasn't that they didn't like the product. It wasn't that they didn't understand the timeline. They just wanted to be included. And so there is a balance that has to take place. Now, I would have told them, hey, it's going to take 9 months to implement your library, because that's what I want. I want 9 months to implement. There is a delicate balance between striving for perfection and striving for progression. So we want to make sure that we're always progressing, and FOLIO does give you that opportunity to implement what's there and then keep improving, either by, you know, the community or developers or whatnot. But you can even change all of your circulation rules while you're in while you're live. And while you're live, once it re-triggers that rule changes. So that even the things that you have out can be changed, which is something that's new. So that's a little story. Any other questions, even from the audience?
Lucy has a question.
Lucy?
So another, maybe just a request for examples. What's like your favorite thing that somebody has simplified, taken complex, simplified way down?
Oh, so I'm gonna go back to Chalmers, and I don't think. Oh, my favorite thing that somebody has simplified. I'm gonna go back to Chalmers, and that they had a list of a lot of material types, and they went down to 2. They went down to things that circulate and things that do not. So they went, the only things that circulate are physical materials, and things that don't circulate aren't physical. So it went down to 2 material types in total. And I love that outside of the box thinking. Now, I've said that to libraries and they've laughed at me, which is fine. They can, and Chalmers is still using it. ALA has, or NLA, National Library of Australia, has 2 patron groups, you know, like they have that simplified. So people inside the library and people outside the library.
Do you know how they came to those conclusions or what kind of processes they went through to simplify those?
There was a lot of discussion.
How they came to the conclusion.
Yeah, how did they come to the conclusions? There was a lot of discussion around what are we using patron groups for. In FOLIO, patron groups are definitely used to control circulation rules. So if the circulation rule was going to be different based off the patron group, that's where they went there. So again, with Chalmers, with material types, if the circulation rule was going to be different based on the material type, that's what they wanted. And they were not changing material circulation rules based on material types. They were changing off of locations rather than material types.
Can I ask you something about that? To
Sure.
follow up with that? So this sounds great and very collegial. How hard was it? Did somebody finally say, okay, we're going to stop talking about this and I've made the decision, or we take a vote, or, you know?
Yeah. So every time I've implemented library, I've talked about there's 3 different types of decisions. There's the command, the consensus, and the consultative decision-making tree, right? A command is Caitlin's going to say, this is the way it is, right? The end. Or in my case, Mark Vexler is going to say, this is the way it is. The end. or it's a consultative decision in that lots of people give me input, my whole team gives me input, and then I have the final say on it, you know, but I'm taking their input. Or it's consensus. Consensus is the, you know, everyone agrees. It is the most lasting and most accepted decision-making process that you can make. It also takes the most amount of time. So, you know, there's that saying, time, money, and effort, pick two. So if you have a lot of time, use it on doing this consensus building, because you will save time in the long run. If you don't have a lot of time, consensus is your best bet. Not consensus, consultative, and then command. Command is the hardest to have lasting, friendly results.
Well, and I'll add that in each of those cases, it's really focusing on the to what end. One of the metaphors that I like is that thinking of a better broom never would have produced the vacuum, but it was about thinking about how do we clean floors that opened up that way of thinking. So even if it is a command decision where somebody says, this is what we're doing, they should also say, and this is why we're losing our contract in 4 months and we don't have a choice. Like, we have to start now and not talk about it. And in other cases, it's those detail level things of, I know you would like to port over the whole list of locations. The goal we're going for, though, is not to simplify the migration process, it's to simplify the circulation process.
Right. And that goes to having a clear vision for why and what you're doing. Because if you don't have a clear vision, people don't know what they're marching towards, but they have a lot of ideas on tactics, right? But if you have a clear vision, people know where they're going, they know some of the tactics that are going to be used there, and you can all march in a single direction. If you have a fuzzy vision, it's like ants or cats. Pick your favorite metaphor. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out some chats.
Oh, chats. I can't operate your mouse. And I know we're kind of at time as well.
No, we've got 10 more minutes.
Oh, yeah. Really?
Yep.
Oh, were we?
Yep.
I thought it was 3:30.
Let's see. It seems
Seems like it's
Scott is saying it seems like a longer implementation might be simpler in some cases rather than rushing things and not going through the basis. I full-heartedly agree, Scott. Preach. You just took me to church. So thank you.
Yeah, checks note here. I think part of it is it really has to be iterative. You can't show up at the first day of your implementation knowing enough about Folio to know where those challenges will be. So it's about iterating the data migration and saying, oh, now that I see that, I do want loan types. Let's do that next time. Those kinds of things, let alone the day-to-day workflows of who's going to be clicking the order templates. What do they need to know? Oh, I didn't realize PO lines had those details. We need to rethink this.
One of the questions we routinely get asked at the beginning of every single project is, how many decisions will I have to make? Or what is the path? And I kind of like, smoke and mirrors it, right? Because Folio is consent first. We've established that. So it depends on what your first decision is. How are you going to go? And then there's going to be branches. We've been around long enough and implemented enough libraries that we know the path, but it's up to you to select it. So it's kind of like a choose your own adventure. So really kind of understanding your own library culture and what the resiliency rate is amongst your staff and how they're going to deal with change should really determine the length of your migration. Even if you have a clear vision of this is where you're going, you really need to be flexible and to allow the staff to kind of cycle through. With NLA, and Terrence will tell you, that at the very beginning of the project, I made some recommendations to them that they laughed at me for. Oh, that's not gonna work, Anya. Like, you don't understand. I go, okay. And so we did it the way they wanted to do it. And then they're like, well, this is not gonna work, Anya. I don't understand. And they're like, we're gonna try what you told us to do in the first place. All right, good. And they're like, oh, but they had to go through that process. They had to move through that. And if they wouldn't have done it, they wouldn't have been as happy. So I almost suggest like not having your contract end for your other ILS up against things, you know, like give yourself some time. The RFP process takes a long time. Don't shorten your implementation process, because who are you going to hurt? You're going to hurt yourself, your staff, you know, like you need to be able to give them that time. Now you can set an end date, that's fine, but be flexible with it. Okay. Yeah. Lucy?
So I would be interested as we start our implementation process for Galileo, if you can provide any tools or using the Chalmers example. I mean,
Yeah.
is it that level of drastic change? Were there strategies or tools they deployed? I'm thinking about like, you know, the 6 whys model, for example,
Yeah.
you know, could be really useful, but if you all have actual, you know, examples, that would be great to hear about. You don't need to
I would like to.
Right. So Chalmers is an extreme example, just for fun. They went live on either like the C or the D release, where we're trying to figure that out. So there was a lot of things now in Folio that did not exist. So they had no choice but to simplify everything, because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to go live. So just thinking about it from that perspective, they knew what they were buying into as well. They wanted the future of Folio, you know, the future of libraries. They wanted to be able to grow with Folio. So they had a different perspective of the first library to go live. They were willing to pare back every single thing that they could possibly do that in order to go live.
How much of that have they kept? Have they expanded? Or have
No, they've kept a
Yeah.
lot of it. They've just
Even though they
grown
could.
with functionality. They've kept that simplicity.
So do you have advice for implementing simplicity when we're not up against a wall? With no choice?
Yeah, when you're not up against the wall, I really would think about outcomes rather than how you're doing things now. Like, don't think about the steps you're taking. Think about what your service is, and then think about how it's the hows and what questions that you need to do. Never ask anybody a why question, even though there's that 6 whys, because whys automatically put people on the defensive. When I ask you, why did you do that? People automatically go, oh, you know, they flash back to their childhood and their parents yelling at them to stop asking them why. So really what you want to do is to think about, what service am I offering? How am I achieving it? And who is it serving? Okay, so those 3 things really allow you to simplify your policies, your way of thinking when you're going to implement, and to kind of look at the settings in Folio to say, this is how I'm going to implement it. It's a really simplified answer to a very complex thing, but you need to have those conversations.
Well, and I would agree with that, to add that as much as in your shoes, I would want a checklist of what do I need to look at. It's really going to be more around like this kind of principles of what is it that you were trying to do, because there is quite a bit of flexibility in Folio. One of the areas where I think of this is libraries often want a checklist of things to check once their inventory records have gone in. Okay, we've migrated our MARC records. You say I'm supposed to test. What am I supposed to test? Like, we could come up with a few dozen, like, make sure this local notes, make sure these identifier types, make sure call number types, like where's the call number, like all those things. And yet, as soon as we have that long list, it'd be daunting for you. And then you'll show up and say, well, oh, we forgot to look at the whatevers that, and so it really be up to the individual institutions to stop and say, okay, what are my normal records? What are my exceptions? What are those outliers that have some strange things where we've repurposed a mark field or things like that? And so that then as implementers, we will just keep asking those questions. Okay, tell me what you're looking for in the mark record. And that's where libraries will really struggle the most, is if they're not familiar with their own data. Workflows, use cases. And then they show up at work and it's live and they say, oh, well, I didn't know to look at that. And like, you can't blame them if they're new on the job and that's the culture or whatever it is. But yeah, that's where it's going to lie, is what are you trying to do?
Any other questions, comments?
FOLIO might be too new for this to have really come up.
Yeah.
But is there like a feedback loop between, so this is my pet one, is every time I try to explain circulation and I pull up the campus library, but I can't even remember them, or location hierarchy, like the first question I get is, can we change those labels? No, you can't, but it doesn't matter. So I'm not asking you that, but like, is there a feedback loop from implementation to development? Like, you know, we did this way in the A release, can we just simplify?
Yeah. So the question is there a feedback loop from implementation to development? Funnily enough, there's an implementation SIG in which you can go and kind of give this feedback. There's also all of the SIGs are your feedback loop. So going to the resource sharing or the resource access SIG and really kind of talking about labels, like maybe you should be at the library, be able to, the implementation, be able to set those labels. I don't know. Or to be able to say like, click something and only one person at your library, like, oh, this will not make sense to most people. I'm going to do this. And then I will never have to answer that question again. But that is the beauty of FOLIO, is that it is iterative and it does change really quickly in technology speak.
And I'll add that I know this is a challenge a lot of smaller libraries of time to dedicate to the community, but they'll often say, oh, can you make sure that gets developed? And our answer is, actually, if you ask for that to be developed, that has a lot more weight than us going to other people at EBSCO or whoever. Call your friends and say, hey, what we really want is to not have this be called institution, but we want it to be called whatever, right? But it's been really nice to see that development happen. That's where all the changes happen. 3 times a year is pretty great to see, like large scale things like that. So we're at time, I think, but thank you so much for your participation and joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Go simplify.